You know that feeling when you're standing in the airport security line, watching people get pulled aside, bags getting ripped open, laptops pulled out at the last second, and you can't help but wonder, what do they know that I don't? I've spent years in the air studying the systems, talking to officers when they're willing to chat, and picking apart the fine print of U.S. travel laws. And I can tell you right now, what happens in an airport is not what most passengers think is happening. So let me ask you something, and I really want you to think about it. What is the one thing you've done at an airport that made you nervous for no reason, or that you later found out could have actually gotten you into serious trouble? Drop that in the comments because I'm going to explain a few things in this article that might make you realize you've been walking a much thinner line than you ever knew. I want you to imagine for a second that you're not a passenger. Instead, picture yourself standing behind the scenes, watching the flow of people from the perspective of the people who run the place. What you'd realize pretty quickly is that airports are designed around one central concept: predictability. From the moment you walk in, every sign, every line, every announcement, every uniform, it's all there to nudge you toward predictable behavior. The reason for that is simple. Predictable people are easy to screen. Unpredictable people are the ones who get extra attention, not because they're necessarily doing anything wrong, but because the entire system is built to flag deviations. And here's the first secret they never tell you. The Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, is not actually looking for drugs in the way you think they are. I know that sounds counterintuitive, especially if you've ever had a friend who got their bag pulled for a granola bar, but hear me out. TSA's official mandate is aviation security, meaning bombs, weapons, threats to the aircraft. When they find your stash of edibles or that pocket knife you forgot was in your backpack, that's not what they were originally looking for. That's a byproduct. And that byproduct gets referred to local law enforcement if it's serious enough, but the real focus is on things that could bring down a plane. The reason I'm telling you this is because so many travelers operate under the assumption that TSA is this all-seeing drug enforcement agency, and they get nervous in ways that make them look suspicious over something that, half the time, the officer doesn't even care about. I've watched people get pulled aside not because of what was in their bag, but because their body language was screaming, "I'm hiding something," and the officer's curiosity got piqued. Then they find the thing you were nervous about, and suddenly a non-issue becomes an issue. That's the first rule of moving through any airport. Act like you belong, and don't invent problems where none exist. Now let's talk about the ID checkpoint, because this is where a lot of people get tripped up in ways they don't even realize. When you hand your ID to the officer, they're not just looking at the photo and the expiration date, they're scanning you. They're trained to notice micro-expressions, the way you approach the podium, whether you make eye contact or look away too quickly, whether you're reaching for your boarding pass before they ask, or fumbling around like you're unprepared. And here's a detail that almost no one knows. The system they're using, the one that scans your ID, is cross-referencing your information with a lot more than just the no-fly list. There's something called the Secure Flight Program, and it's been quietly matching passenger data against law enforcement databases for years. If there's an outstanding warrant in another state, even for something minor, it can pop up. I've seen travelers casually walk up to the podium thinking everything is fine, only to have a law enforcement officer appear a few minutes later and politely ask them to step aside. The person usually looks shocked because they forgot about a traffic warrant from 3 years ago or an unpaid ticket in a state they haven't visited in a decade. The system remembers. So if you're the type of person who thinks you can just fly out and deal with it later, think again. The airport is one of the worst places to have unresolved legal issues, because now you're in a federal facility, and local cops are more than happy to make that pickup. Another layer of this that nobody talks about is how your behavior in the terminal can actually get you flagged before you even reach the security checkpoint. There's a whole network of officers, some in uniform, some not, who are watching the foot traffic from the moment you exit your car or step off the shuttle. They look for what they call behavioral indicators. Things like excessive sweating when it's not hot, looking over your shoulder repeatedly, making sudden changes in direction, or lingering in areas where normal travelers don't linger, like near restricted doors or employee entrances. And it's not just TSA doing this. Local police, airport security, even airline employees are trained to report suspicious activity. I had a conversation once with a former airport cop who told me that the majority of people they stop for questioning aren't terrorists or criminals. They're just normal travelers who did something unusual without realizing how it looked. One guy got pulled aside because he kept walking back and forth between the ticket counter and the security line, checking his phone and pacing. He was just anxious about whether his flight was delayed and whether he had time to grab food. But from a distance, it looked like casing the area. They detained him for 45 minutes while they sorted it out. He missed his flight, all because he didn't just sit down and wait like a normal passenger. So here's a piece of advice that sounds simple but matters more than you'd think. When you're in an airport, move with purpose. Find a spot to wait, and if you need to pace or walk around, do it in a way that doesn't look like you're circling the same area repeatedly without reason. Let's move to the security screening itself, because this is where the secrets get really interesting. You know how they always say to take your laptop out of your bag and put it in a separate bin? The official reason is that the density of electronics makes it harder for the X-ray to see through. That's true, but it's not the whole story. The real reason is that officers are looking for tampering. A laptop that's been modified with the casing glued shut or extra components added can be a red flag for an improvised device. By forcing you to separate it, they get a clear, unobstructed view of the internal structure. Same thing with tablets and large power banks. And here's something that will surprise you. TSA officers actually have a lot of discretion when it comes to what they let through. You might have had an experience where one officer made you throw away a bottle of water, but another officer let you through with a full Nalgene. That's not inconsistency in training, it's discretion based on perceived threat level. If you're calm, cooperative, and the officer doesn't get any red flags from your behavior, they're more likely to give you the benefit of the doubt on small things. If you're argumentative, rolling your eyes, sighing loudly, or acting like the rules are beneath you, that officer is suddenly going to enforce every single regulation to the letter. I've seen people lose expensive skincare products, expensive wine, even tools they thought they'd packed safely, all because they decided to make a scene. The golden rule of security screening is simple: be boring. Be so unremarkable that the officer forgets you existed the moment you walk away. Now, I want to talk about something that rarely gets discussed, but has huge implications for anyone who travels internationally, and that's the concept of the exit interview that happens at the gate. This isn't official terminology, but it's something Customs and Border Protection does on certain international departures. You're sitting at the gate, waiting to board a flight out of the country, and a plainclothes officer walks up and starts casually chatting with passengers. They'll ask where you're going, how long you'll be there, what you do for work. It seems friendly, and it's meant to seem friendly, but what they're actually doing is profiling for things like money smuggling, human trafficking, or people attempting to travel to countries with which the U.S. has strained relations. If your story doesn't add up, if you seem evasive, or if you match certain indicators, you might find yourself being asked to step away from the gate for a more thorough interview. And if that happens, you're not getting on that flight. I've seen it happen more times than I can count, and the passenger is always bewildered, insisting they did nothing wrong. And maybe they didn't in their mind, but the law gives CBP broad authority to question anyone leaving the country, and if they decide you're a risk, they can pull your passport right there. The lesson here is that your interaction with law enforcement doesn't end at the security checkpoint. It continues all the way until the plane door closes. So maintain that same calm, cooperative demeanor all the way through, because you never know who's watching. I want to take you deeper into something that most passengers never even consider, and that's how the airline itself can be the one to turn you away, not the government. People assume that if they have a valid ticket and they show up on time, they're getting on that plane. That's not true. Airlines have what's called a right to refuse transport, and it's written into the contract of carriage that you agreed to when you bought your ticket. They can deny you boarding for a whole range of reasons that have nothing to do with security. If a gate agent decides you're intoxicated, even if you're not legally drunk but just acting loud or disruptive, they can pull you off the flight. If you're wearing clothing with offensive language or symbols, they can deny you. If you get into an argument with an employee at any point, they can flag your reservation and have you removed. And here's the part that scares people when they hear it. Airlines share information with each other. If you're banned from one airline, that information sometimes gets entered into a database that other carriers can see. So a mistake on a Delta flight could affect your ability to fly on United or American months later. I've met people who thought they'd just take a different airline next time, only to find out at check-in that they've been flagged across the board. It's not automatic and it's not always permanent, but it happens more often than you'd think. Let's shift gears and talk about the physical side of the airport, because there are some structural secrets that can actually save you time and frustration. You know how there's always a long line at the security checkpoint closest to the main entrance? That's by design. Airports route the heaviest foot traffic to the most visible checkpoints to control flow. What most people don't realize is that many airports have secondary checkpoints tucked away in less obvious locations, sometimes in different terminals or on different levels, that are significantly less crowded. I'm not talking about employee entrances. I'm talking about public checkpoints that are just less convenient to reach. In some airports, if you take an elevator to a different floor and walk 5 minutes, you'll find a checkpoint with half the wait time. The reason people don't use them is because they follow the crowd instead of looking at a map. I've done this myself dozens of times, and it's never failed me. But here's the catch. You have to know your airport. You can't just wander around hoping to find a hidden checkpoint. This is where pre-trip research actually pays off. Look at the airport diagram before you leave. Identify all the security checkpoints and see which ones are farthest from the parking garages and rideshare drop-offs. Those are the ones most locals use. Another structural secret that no one tells you is about the sterile area after security. Once you're past security, you're technically in a federal sterile area, which means certain rules change. You can leave the sterile area and come back, but you have to go through security again. That's obvious. What's not obvious is that if you have a connecting flight, you might inadvertently leave the sterile area without realizing it. Some airports have weird layouts where you have to exit security to go between terminals, and if you don't know that ahead of time, you could find yourself standing outside security with 40 minutes until your next flight and a long line ahead of you. I've seen this happen at Denver, at JFK, at LAX, airports where terminal connections aren't seamless. Always check whether your connection requires a security rescreening. It's usually listed in the airport's terminal map, but most people don't think to look until it's too late. Now let's get into something that feels uncomfortable to talk about, but needs to be said. The way you interact with law enforcement or TSA officers can have consequences that go beyond the immediate moment. I'm not talking about being polite. Everyone knows you should be polite. I'm talking about how officers use discretion in ways that can permanently affect your travel status. For example, if you're the subject of what's called a TSA referral, meaning an officer flags you for additional screening and documents the reason, that referral can stay in a database for a certain period. Next time you fly, the system might flag you automatically for additional screening, meaning you get the full pat-down, bag search, explosive swab every time. This is known informally as being on the list. And while it's not the same as the no-fly list, it's a massive inconvenience that can follow you for months or even years. How do you get a referral? Sometimes it's random, but often it's because you did something that made an officer feel like you were a threat, even if you weren't. Arguing, refusing to follow instructions, making jokes about bombs, even something as simple as having a name that matches a flagged individual can trigger it. The point is, once you're in that system, it's very hard to get out. There's no appeals process for being selected for additional screening. It's purely at the discretion of the officers on the ground. This brings me to a broader point about the mindset you should have when traveling, especially if you're a frequent flyer. The U.S. travel system is built on the principle of administrative authority, meaning that the people in charge, whether they're TSA, CBP, or airline employees, have the authority to make decisions that affect you without needing a court order or even a formal charge. They can detain you, question you, seize your property, and deny you travel privileges based on their assessment of risk. And the legal standard for most of these actions is not probable cause, like you'd expect from a police officer on the street. It's reasonable suspicion, which is a much lower bar. This is the part that most travelers never understand until it happens to them. They think they have rights that, in the airport environment, are significantly curtailed. The Fourth Amendment still applies, but courts have consistently ruled that administrative searches at airports are constitutional because they serve a special need beyond ordinary law enforcement. In plain English, that means TSA can search your bags without a warrant, and CBP can search your electronic devices at the border without a warrant, and there's very little you can do to stop them. I want to spend a moment on electronic device searches because this is one of the most misunderstood areas of travel law. At international arrivals, CBP has the authority to search your phone, laptop, tablet, and any other electronic device without a warrant. They can clone your device, they can request your passwords, and if you refuse, they can detain your device for further inspection, which can take days or weeks. I've seen people lose their devices for months over a refusal to provide a password. Now here's the nuance that no one explains. CBP's authority is strongest at the border, meaning when you're entering or exiting the country. Domestic flights, once you're inside the U.S., are a different legal landscape. TSA doesn't have the same warrantless search authority for electronic content that CBP does at the border. But if you're on a domestic flight and you do something that leads to a law enforcement encounter, that's a different story. The key takeaway is that if you're traveling internationally, you should assume that your devices could be searched. If there's anything on them that you wouldn't want a federal officer to see, either leave it at home or take steps to protect it in ways that don't involve breaking the law, because lying to a federal officer or tampering with evidence is a whole different level of trouble. There's another angle to this that's not about security or law enforcement, but about the airline's own internal systems and how they treat passengers. I've learned over the years that airlines keep detailed notes on passengers. If you've ever been difficult with a gate agent, complained excessively, demanded compensation in an aggressive way, or caused a scene on a flight, there's a good chance that a note was added to your passenger record. That note can affect how you're treated in the future. If you're flagged as a problem passenger, you might find that you're more likely to be selected for random bag searches, more likely to be bumped from oversold flights, and less likely to receive goodwill gestures like upgrades or waived fees. The system isn't completely transparent, but anyone who's worked in the industry will tell you that there's a running log, and it follows you. The inverse is also true. If you're consistently kind, patient, and respectful, that can also be noted, and it can lead to better treatment. I've had gate agents go out of their way to help me with tight connections, rebook me on better flights, even waive change fees, all because they recognized my name and saw positive notes from previous interactions. Let's talk about what happens when things go wrong, because that's when the system reveals its true nature. If you miss a flight due to a security delay, the airline is not obligated to rebook you for free unless the delay was caused by the airline itself. Security delays are considered outside the airline's control. That means if you spent 2 hours in the TSA line and missed your departure, the airline can technically require you to pay a change fee or the difference in fare. I've seen airlines waive this as a courtesy, but they don't have to. The same goes for weather delays, air traffic control issues, and most things that aren't mechanical or crew related. The reason I mention this is because a lot of passengers show up at the counter furious, demanding to be rebooked for free, and when the agent explains the policy, the passenger escalates the situation. That escalation is what leads to the notes I mentioned earlier. The smarter move is to approach calmly, acknowledge that you understand the policy, and politely ask if there's anything they can do to help. You'd be surprised how often that approach works. I want to circle back to something I touched on earlier about international travel, because there's a layer to this that a lot of frequent travelers don't even know about. The U.S. government collects and retains data on international travel through a system called APIS, which stands for Advanced Passenger Information System. Airlines are required to transmit your passport data, itinerary, and other details to CBP before you depart. What most people don't realize is that this data is shared with other countries as well, and it's retained indefinitely. So if you travel to a country that the U.S. has a data sharing agreement with, your movement is being tracked in a way that's far more comprehensive than most travelers assume. This becomes relevant if you're applying for things like global entry or TSA pre-check later. If your travel history shows patterns that CBP considers high risk, like frequent trips to certain countries or stays that don't align with typical tourism, you could be denied for those trusted traveler programs. I've known people who were denied global entry with no explanation, and when they filed a Freedom of Information request, they found out it was because of travel to a country that triggered a manual review. The system doesn't have to tell you why you were denied, they just send a generic letter. So if you're thinking of applying for these programs, understand that your travel history is under a microscope. One more secret that I think is important to share involves the concept of airport jurisdiction and how it can complicate things if you're in a situation where you need help. Airports are often a patchwork of jurisdictions. You might be in a city-owned airport, but the law enforcement officers you see might be a mix of city police, county sheriff, state troopers, and federal agents. Each has different authority and different priorities. If you're the victim of a crime like theft or harassment, knowing which jurisdiction to contact can be the difference between getting help and being told it's not their problem. Most airports have a centralized dispatch that can route you to the right agency, but if you approach an officer who's there for a specific federal function, they might not have the authority or the interest to handle your local crime. The better approach is to go to an information desk or call the airport's non-emergency number, which is usually posted somewhere. This is one of those things you never think about until you need it, and then you realize how complicated it can be. I also want to touch on something that might sound paranoid, but is actually just practical. The way you pack your bag matters for reasons beyond just getting through security. If your bag is ever lost or delayed, the airline system for reuniting you with it relies entirely on the tag they put on at check-in. That tag has a 10-digit number that's the key to everything. I've seen people take photos of their bags with the tag visible, which is smart. What's even smarter is putting a secondary identifier inside the bag, like a printed sheet with your name, flight number, and contact information. If the external tag gets ripped off, the only way the airline can identify your bag is if they open it and find something inside that ties it to you. I also recommend removing old bag tags. This is a small thing that causes massive confusion. If you have 3 old destination tags still dangling from your handle, The automated sorting system can get confused, and your bag might end up on a carousel in a city you visited 3 months ago instead of following you to your current destination. It sounds like a minor detail, but baggage handlers will tell you that old tags are one of the most common reasons for misrouted luggage. Now, let's talk about the psychological game that happens in airports, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The entire airport environment is designed to manage stress and compliance through subtle cues. The flooring changes as you approach security to slow your pace. The lighting is calibrated to feel neutral but slightly alert. The announcements are recorded in a specific cadence that conveys authority without alarm. Even the placement of seating is designed to keep people moving toward their gates rather than clustering in high-traffic areas. What this means for you as a traveler is that the environment is literally working on your subconscious to make you more compliant and less likely to cause disruption. That's not a conspiracy, it's environmental psychology applied to public safety. And the more aware you are of it, the more you can use it to your advantage. Instead of fighting the flow, which creates stress and makes you stand out, you can move with it, stay calm, and let the system work for you. One of the most valuable secrets I've learned over the years is the importance of understanding the difference between mandatory and discretionary interactions. When a TSA officer tells you to do something, that's a mandatory interaction. You comply. When a gate agent asks how your day is going, that's discretionary. You can engage or not. But here's the trick. Experienced travelers use discretionary interactions to build goodwill. A smile, a quick joke, a genuine "how are you?" to the person scanning your boarding pass. These small moments create a positive impression that can pay off later. I've had gate agents remember me from a previous interaction and go out of their way to help me when I had a problem. I've had TSA officers wave me through when I accidentally left a water bottle in my bag because they recognized me as a frequent traveler who's usually compliant. The system is staffed by humans who have discretion, and humans respond to positive interactions. You can be the passenger who's just another face, or you can be the passenger who makes their day slightly better. The latter gets better outcomes.